Thanks for staying with us. We're going back to our lead story where the federal government has suspended indefinitely microblogging sites and social networking services here in Nigeria. And we have joined us to discuss this a tech lawyer, Timi Olagunju. It's good to have you join us on TVC News at 7. Of course, this has been generating reactions since last night, since it was announced. What I'd like to ask you is, given the reasons that the government has cited for this ban, would you say there is a constitutional right? Does the government have the constitutional right to do this? And is there any justification given the reasons that the government has given?
Well, two things. Firstly is you talked about constitution, and then secondly, you talked about a circumstantial issue. So first thing, in terms of constitution, chapter 4 of the constitution is quite clear on issues around freedom of expression. And to go a step further, Nigeria is a signatory to several treaties and several United Nations resolutions to the effect that governments must make policies that are not restrictive, but policies that are focused on facilitating that freedom of expression that is a fundamental human right. So the key question will then be, this particular policy, is it restrictive on the freedom of expression, or is it facilitating the freedom of expression? Now, what we get from that answer, or the answer to that question, will now determine to a large extent the reality on ground as to whether this is within legal frameworks in terms of fundamental human rights. Secondly, in terms of the circumstance of the issue, Mr. President is not the first person whose tweet has been deleted. In that context, even Donald Trump had his entire Twitter account blocked. So in that context, and the US government did not go about trying to, take off Twitter or block the American people from Twitter in that context. So there are precedents already as to removal of people's tweets and blocking of account, because it's Twitter's house. And when you come to Twitter's house, you need to abide by their rules in that context. Yeah. So.
Okay, but I would like you to help us better understand this. The Attorney General of the Federation, Abubakar Malami, has ordered the prosecution of offenders of this ban. Can you help us clarify who will be the violators or offenders of this ban? Because some people are confused. A couple of minutes ago, I still saw that you tweeted saying that you will be on the program at this time. So who are going to be the violators or offenders of this ban?
Well, in that context, if perhaps the government might be looking at people who are largely continued users of Twitter as violators, but if you now just oppose it with the constitutional provision of freedom of expression, then you'll see that that particular statement goes to null and void in context of that. Look, when it comes to banning a particular platform, the truth about it is there are three options to the government. First option is to go the legal route, institute legal proceedings against Twitter. Second option is either for the government to now shut down the entire internet infrastructure, which I don't think the Nigerian government will take as a route. And the third option is basically to send some kind of policy statements to ISP and telcos to the effect of closing that particular platform or access to that platform for the Nigerian people. And so to a large extent, you cannot effectively, ban Twitter effectively. And so to a large extent, this seems to be on the Nigerian people more than it is on Twitter. And as such, if it is on the Nigerian people, there is no legal balance whatsoever for the government to now criminalize the use of Twitter as a platform or whatsoever social media platform whatsoever. Freedom of expression is guaranteed. But then after the freedom of expression is exercised, those who fall within the ambit of maybe defamation or libel can then be held within the ambit of the law. But to say people cannot express their selves through any platform whatsoever is absolutely unconstitutional.
Mr. Olagunju, I don't know if you're still with us.
Yes, I'm still very much with you.
Okay, I was going to ask you, so we see that the Nigerian Bar Association, SERAP, some other civil society organizations have said, we're going to go to court. What legal drama do we see in the coming days?
Okay, so projecting it forward, I think that this, to a large extent, is just beyond even legal drama, because the Nigerian government needs to understand that it's losing a lot by this decision, not just in terms of investors' perception of Nigeria, but also in terms of value-added tax, VAT, and even personal income tax that come around the business and economic ecosystem around Twitter for the Nigerian people. Now, back to the question about legal issues. What we might see, the court is currently on strike, but judges are not necessarily on strike. So as a matter of public policy, this might come to an expedited issue of public policy as such. But in context of legal issues, you might see situations where, the proponents will have to push in for freedom of expression and also setting other frameworks globally, which the Nigerian government is a part of, that expressly requires that the Nigerian government facilitates tools that helps to drive freedom of expression rather than restrict it. So these are core issues. Now, another thing is that there's this current statement from the Ministry of Information as regards directing NBC to the effect that the NBC needs to start charging, some license and all that. Look, to a large extent, what we have seems to be more of the presidency rather than the president. And this is a call on the president because there seems to be like a lot of agency lapse. This particular jurisdiction falls within the jurisdiction of the NCC, Nigerian Communications Commission, and not the NBC. And so you can see a lot of agency overlap. So you might have issues around this agency overlap and arbitral policies coming out from the wrong agencies being challenged in court.
I was going to ask, Nigeria joins about 8 countries now that are in this infamous club of blocking or banning social networking services. Some persons would ask, does Nigeria have what it takes to enforce this ban?
Oh, fantastic question. I raised the point that there are 3 options that the Nigerian government can take. First is to ensure that they take up legal actions against Twitter. Second is to ensure that they perhaps, shut down the entire internet infrastructure. Third is to direct telcos and ISPs to block restriction to the platform. So that's the best so far. And it seems they are following the third options. But that is still not effective because there are other routes through which Twitter can be accessed. And look, on a final note, I've seen some persons argue that Twitter is a private company and the policy is directed towards a private company and not to the Nigerian people. The key question I want to then put forward in this position is that for you to be a company under Nigeria's law, you must be registered with the Corporate Affairs Commission, or else you're not an artificial person. And so the jurisdiction of the government's policy framework might not necessarily in administrative and policy sense affect Twitter as a private company, but more affects the Nigerian people who are within the ambit of the administrative and policy framework of the Nigerian government.
Interesting point there. I guess we have to leave it there. Well, it seems the chirping of the bird has been silenced for now. Hopefully, that does not damage the unity of the country. Tech lawyer Timi Olagunju, thank you so much for joining us on TVC News at 7.